right, so today we're here and we're just going to talk about a few quick differences of the JK versus the JL. Here we have a 2019 JL, and I thought we'd just give you a little tour really quick. Maybe you have seen it, maybe you haven't, but the first thing we'll talk about is obviously the Rubicon fender flares, which they're a lot bigger and they're a lot taller than the fender flares on the Sahara and the Sport. That's what gives the Rubicon the ability to run a 35-inch tire from the factory, and then with a small 2.5-inch lift, which we're actually going to install today, you can run a 37 in this wheel well. So that's one of the main differences between a JK and a JL visually is the fender flares. Now, as far as mechanically, obviously we have the same Pentastar V6 motor unless you have the 2.0 4-cylinder. But one of the biggest changes, and I own a JT and I also own a JK, and one of the biggest differences is the brakes. This thing's got a huge set of brakes on it, and obviously when you take a drive, especially with larger tires, you can surely tell that really quickly when you start driving. The brakes on the JL JT are incredible. So you've got a nice large dual piston caliper. It's also got a fairly large brake pad in here in the caliper, plus you got a pretty good sized rotor. So that's one of the big differences right off between the JL and the JK. Okay, so the next probably biggest change between a JK and a JL is the steering. So you've got this really heavy duty drag link. If you look at the size of this compared to the drag link on the JK, this is a pretty noticeable size increase. Also, the tie rod is also a very noticeable size increase. The other thing that's a pretty big difference is the steering knuckle. They're now aluminum. I believe they're forged aluminum versus the steel knuckle that you used to have on the JK. So obviously the theme is they're trying to keep the axle lighter, so they're going with the aluminum where they can. But they surely didn't cut any corners on this drag link and this tie rod. They're pretty good size. So, and I've heard really good things about them so far. So over the next few years, we'll start getting some pretty good durability reports back on them. One of the other key features on this new axle is this FAD, which is the front axle disconnect. Obviously, JK didn't have a front axle disconnect. And basically, this is kind of reminiscent of the old YJ Cherokee days, where they have a sliding collar in here that disconnects the axle shaft. And they kind of did that in lieu of locking hubs so that this front end would not turn while you're going down the freeway, which in turn saves a little bit of gas mileage. Now, how much gas mileage it saves, nobody really knows for sure. We will be doing that test shortly. We're going to be upgrading our Gladiator to a one-piece Yukon axle. It's their new kit, so we will be getting rid of the disconnect on our JT, and we're gonna for sure do before and after mileage, so we'll actually have that data shortly. Okay, so the other thing in the front here, we have the same kind of sway bar disconnect we did in the JK, and I can't confirm it right this moment, but it actually looks like this electronic portion of the sway bar may actually be very similar to the JK. So we will be looking into possibly replacing this with one of the Off-Road Evolution air-powered sway bar disconnects. And if you have your Taser or your Taser Mini, you'll be able to disconnect this out of the computer. So we're going to be doing that shortly, and we'll bring that information to you as well. So from JK to JL, this little skid plate's a little bit different. You know, the other one was kind of a different shape, so they've lightened this up quite a bit. You still got a pretty good thickness here to the plate and everything, but they did change that a little bit. It's definitely a lot more minimal under here. So we'll be exploring different belly pan options here shortly. We've got an install coming up for that. Other noticeable difference underneath here, the resonator is a little bit bigger on the exhaust system, but notably missing is the evap canister, which is no longer in this area. They've actually relocated it up to the rear fender well, so that's kind of a cool deal because it's one less thing to hit under here. And then also one thing to notice is that you've got a lot less profile on the bottom of both the front and rear axles, and that's because the ring and pinion's a little bit smaller. And right now the jury is out whether that means it's weaker or stronger. Nobody knows yet, but basically you can notice a pretty sizable difference here with they bulked this down a lot more, so you got a lot better ground clearance than you did with the old style JK 44s.